Hey everyone, I'm Heather.
I'm Hope.
And I'm Heidi. And this is the Finding Our Way Through podcast. We're so excited to have our listeners back and ready for part two of our last episode, where we talked about what it was like for us growing up as a part of a sibling set. One of the reasons that we wanted to start with this particular topic for our podcast was that we thought it would give our listeners a chance to get to know us and the context that we share in terms of our experience of being in the world. Just what I mean, identical triplets. We also wanted to start here because the podcast, it's geared to shared human struggles. And for us as triplets, we thought, what a great way to talk about how we've been trying to find our way through being identical triplets our entire lives. The fact of our birth and entering the world at the same time, minus the minutes in between our deliveries, of course, is something you never get free from. It's really just a part of who we are. So, having said that, for those of you who did not listen to part one, you can go ahead and do so. Find our podcast on Spotify, Apple, or Google Play. You'll hear us talk about what was good about being a triplet and what was hard. And today we're going to finish up providing some advice to parents of sibling sets, those who are a part of a sibling set, some advice to our younger selves, and just some ways that we ourselves have attempted to find our way through being triplets. So, having said that, let's get started. I thought this would be a good question for you. Looking back on your experience as a triplet, what is it you would like to tell someone who's part of a sibling set today?
Oh gosh, Hi, thanks. It's such a good question. And as I think about it, my advice would be just to be yourself. I think that finding true happiness in life really comes down to doing your best to be yourself and really trying to like or love the person that you are, even when others in the environment around you don't really allow for it. Um, I'd also tell, sibling sets and multiples, etc., to do the best job you can to really appreciate being a multiple, because I think that sometimes twins and triplets, etc., get wrapped up in trying to create their own identity. And I think sometimes, you can really lose sight of the gift that you've been given in terms of, having these lifelong companions. But having said that, I think I'd also say that even if there are multiples out there who, for whatever reason, don't really get along with each other, I would say, don't force the relationship. Don't force, kind of guilt or shame upon yourself. I would say, really do the best to be yourself. And maybe at some point, you ultimately end up developing a relationship with your multiple. And my hope for you is that you do. That's what I would say.
Awesome. And you guys would probably both agree with this, based on just what Heather said. Don't force the relationship. I mean, there were some times when we were growing up where there was some tension between the three of us, right?
Without a doubt, yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, I can't really think of a particular time or an experience where I was just so mad and so frustrated and so upset with either of you guys, but I know that there definitely were times
Well, I
because
think, sorry, Hyde. I mean, I think the dynamic of three is challenging because it always felt like maybe one of us was on the outside, right? Like when you have a pair, it's easy to kind of go off. But when you have three, two usually pair off and the one is left feeling excluded, even if maybe that's not what's happening. So I think just the simple fact that the dynamic of three is challenging was probably challenging for us as kids, and we probably hurt each other's feelings, and so hence, like, developed into some sort of tension. But I just remember, for me, I do remember times where I felt like you and Heather were kind of off on your own and I was on the outside. And maybe there were times where Heather felt like you and I were together, and
Mhm.
times where Heidi, you felt like Heather and I were off doing our thing and you were excluded. But I think the dynamic of three can be a challenge.
But isn't that so interesting though? Because, that we all kind of felt the same way. Because I've told you guys before, I think, throughout really, elementary and upper elementary school, for whatever reason, I was always in a different class than you guys. You were
Yeah, that's
always
right. I
paired
remember
together
that.
in the same classes. And I always remember feeling like an outsider, like the outlier, like why am I always in different classes than Hope and Heidi? So it's really interesting that we all sort of felt that way at one point or another, throughout our childhood.
Don't you wonder
Yeah.
what the psychology of our schools were in trying to separate us? So, like, maybe there were only two teachers for a specific grade,
I think that's true.
and they were
Yeah, there
trying
were
to
only
figure
2
out,
teachers.
like, how do we not put all three girls into the same class? I don't know. It's just funny. If you could look back, the psychology of who was making those decisions would be pretty interesting to review.
Yeah, for sure. So great comments. Hope, did you have anything to add to what Heath said about any advice to people that are part of sibling sets?
I think the only thing I would add is um, just try and be yourself. Kind of try to believe in who you are, irrespective of this multiple status. Don't let other people feel like you're being compared, so that you feel like you have to do more than someone else. Just try and embrace all of the things that make you as an individual, even though you're a part of this sibling pair, special. Try to focus on the things that, make you who you are, irrespective of anybody around you. Focus on your talents. Don't try to, make yourself be someone that you're not.
Yeah, and I think that that probably is something that kids feel more empowered to do today than maybe I think the three of us felt empowered to do when we were growing up. And I say that primarily just because there wasn't a lot of, you know, extra sort of disposable income to be
Right.
able to afford us opportunities to take like dance classes or tennis lessons or things that maybe if we had been exposed to, we would have been able to figure out what our interests were apart from the interests of, each other.
That's a great
Um,
point. Totally agree with that.
so I do think that maybe when we were growing up, we didn't really feel like we had the option to try to explore what was interesting to us individually because, we were always sort of put into the same sports. We played softball, we played CYO basketball, we played field hockey, basketball, softball when we were in high school. So we were always doing things together. And yeah, so I love what you have to say about kids today trying to really fight for what they like, what their interests are, apart from, yeah, their siblings.
Heidi, it's funny your comment. It goes back to what we said in our first podcast about this in part 1. It kind of goes back to that nature versus nurture thing, right?
Mhm.
Like we were put into the same sports, and likely maybe we didn't realize that we could choose to do something different because we had always been put into the same bucket. So it's really interesting. It just reminded me of the nature versus nurture thing.
And I
Yeah.
would just say too that I'm not sure. I'm not sure I felt like we had an option to choose. We were all pretty much rule followers and sort of just did as we were told,
Told, yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
interesting.
All right. Well, guys, let's go to the parents of sibling
Mm.
sets. Hope, maybe you can speak to what you would like to say to people who find themselves raising, twins, triplets, quadruplets, multiple births.
Sure, Hyde. You know, if I reflect on some of the things that maybe I would have said to our parents, and I
Like what you would want them to know?
yeah, I mean,
Right.
just for any parent that is raising a sibling pair, I would say just love and appreciate each of your kids for who they are. Whatever you do not compare them. Just like you should never compare any of your kids to one another. Whatever you do, don't compare your multiples to each other. Treat them as individuals. Don't treat them as a pair or multiples. Please never say, so and so did this, so you should. If your sister got an A, you should get an A. If your sister's playing a sport, you should play a sport. If your brother is, going to try out for theater, you should try out for theater. Just treat each of your kids like they have their own unique talents and abilities and embrace those. That is what I would say.
Well, that's great advice. Heath, do you have anything to add to what Hope just said?
No, because really, if you were to ask me that question, it would probably be pretty much verbatim with what Hope had said. Again, it's just not comparing the twins and triplets to each other, and never consider them to be the same. I think, again, it goes back to embracing each multiple really for their own uniqueness, and that's uniqueness of spirit, that's uniqueness of personality. And I think it's so important for parents to really support each child in their search for what they are most passionate about in life. So it's really verbatim to what Hope said and to what you said earlier, Hyde.
What about
Yeah,
you, Hyde? What would you say?
I think that, it's exactly sort of the same that you guys have expressed. Back to that word that we used in our first podcast, part one, it was like individuation. So just helping your kids to know who they are apart from who their twin or triplet or quadruplet sibling is. You said this, don't have them do the same things just because it's easier or cheaper.
Hmm.
And let them dress the way they want to dress, not dress them the same. I know that was something that we struggled with for a while. And for a while, I think it was cute and fun until we became aware of how it made us kind of stand out and maybe I think made us feel a little bit insecure instead of sort of really enjoying the experience. So instead of carbon copying, I guess, create space for your kids to express their own unique likes, tastes, fashion stuff. And I think you guys both said, like, just make sure you spend one on one time with your multiples so that you get to know them as individuals, what they like, what they're interested in, what they love, what they don't love, apart from what your other kids like or are interested in. So, I mean, I know this is, some of the redundancy that we talked about in part one of the podcast. And I guess the other thing that would be important is just for parents to enjoy the downtime they get to have when your twins or your triplets are entertaining each other. One of the benefits
It's a great point.
yeah, I mean, I remember I nannied for twins, when I got back from the Peace Corps before I got married. I think you guys remember that, but I always thought, wow, it's kind of easier to have twins because they entertain each other, and that was me as an older, like 20 something, getting the opportunity to, be around twins from just it was a different perspective. So
Well,
yeah, yeah, just having that time to do something that maybe you want to do because, your kids, especially as they get older, not like, as infants or little toddlers who need a lot of supervision, but as they get older and they're playing with each other, like it gives you some free time to do stuff that you need to do or want to do and maybe just rest too.
it's such a great point. I found myself laughing when you said, sometimes it's easier because twins or sibling pairs entertain themselves. Think back on our childhood for a moment and think about how we entertained ourselves. We were together all the time. I mean, I honestly don't remember many instances when we were playing that we weren't just by ourselves. Our parents, weren't at any of the different places that we were playing hide and seek. We were down on the beach. We were running around, entertaining each other without really a lot of parental involvement. So I just think that's a great point.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, if you think back to our summers, right? I mean, we would get on our bicycles at 8 o'clock in the morning and we'd come home at 7 o'clock at night and nobody would have known where we were or what we were doing if we ate food. And I'm not sure that was like specific to us, or it was more generational for all the kids in our
Different
generation.
time,
Definitely
right?
generation,
A
yeah.
All
different
of us were,
time.
latchkey kids. Um, but yeah, it's very true. We were always together.
So it's
Yeah,
a
it's
great
fun.
point, Hyde.
Yeah, no, and I think, shout out to Pete Babine and Heather Melanson and
Allie
Susan Spencer,
Rogers.
Heather
Allie.
Melanson.
Yeah, I mean, all our friends that we just spent so much time with in the neighborhood playing for hours and hours. It was just such a great childhood.
Yeah, completely agree. Thankful for it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for those comments. They're awesome, and hopefully they'll be helpful to some of the people that are listening in. Just a couple more questions, guys. So, one question is, if you could go back and have a conversation with your younger self,
Mm.
the let's just say late middle school, high school self, what is it you would want to say to her about being, part of a sibling set?
Heather, you want to start or?
Sure. I think that's another great question, Heidi. I think if I were to tell my younger self something, I think I would say that I feel like I took being a triplet for granted at times. Um, I think I would have had more fun with being a triplet, if I look back on it. And I think I would have focused more on being a better sister and friend when I was younger. I do think that kids in general, tend to get wrapped up in themselves and can sometimes be, self-centered and kind of lose sight of what they have around them. And I think um, for me, it would definitely be to tell my younger self to appreciate my uniqueness a bit more, and that growing up as part of a sisterhood inside of a large family is really, really special. That's what I would say. So, what about you, Hopi?
I think I would say the same, but I would say some other things too. So I definitely would have told myself to have more fun. Maybe maybe played some tricks on people, but I think the three of us were, as we've said a couple times now, rule followers, and so maybe our moral compass was such that maybe even today we wouldn't play tricks on people. For me, though, I think looking back, um, I maybe would have sort of put arms around myself and given myself a hug, and
Mm,
somewhere in my head would have told myself that my self-worth wasn't wrapped up in being a triplet. I think I said in part one, I felt a degree of confidence or strength being a part of a unit. But I think internally, I always felt like I had to try so hard to, be a good student, be a good athlete, in part because I was comparing myself to the two of you, because I think my perception of those around me, and I love our family more than anything, and they never did anything with intention, but I just felt a natural comparison. And I think if I could, I would hug myself and say, you're good enough as you are. You don't have to be anybody that you're not. You don't have to try extra hard. Just try to find those things that you love and be passionate about those things that you love and go for those things that you love without thinking about what Heather you were doing or what Heidi was doing. Um, yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing for me, just like that I was okay, that I was good enough without having to try super hard to, compete with the perception of others.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think hope that what you talk about in that regard has not just to do with the fact that we were triplets and there was an unspoken kind of comparison always going on under the surface. I think from outside, um, you know, witnesses, people sort of like looking at us from the outside. I don't know if that makes sense, but
It does.
I think that part of what you're talking about too was just, you know, a result of having been raised in the family system that we were raised in and kind of what the expectations were, not just for us, but really for everybody in our family. I mean, I think
Yeah.
really honestly, there was a message sent that made us all feel like failure was unacceptable, So I think all of us were raised somewhat perfectionistic.
It's a really good
So
point.
yeah, but so what I might tell my younger self, similar to, I guess, what you said, Hope, just about giving myself a hug. I think it would just be, sweetie, it's going to be okay. You know, you'll have an opportunity to figure out who you are. And some of the pain I think that I've felt over the years in trying to find my way through, being triplets to kind of who I am outside of that has been the result of, just what I came to believe about myself, kind of what I talked about in part one of the podcast.
Hmm.
So, sweetie, you are okay just as you are. I see you. I am interested in you. I care deeply about the experience that, you've had and continue to have. And, ultimately, just you being you is enough, sort of, and it resonates with what you said, Hope, about your self-esteem and self-worth. So anyway, um, yeah. So, and
Making me
there's
it's
been a
making
lot
me
of healing
sad.
along the way. So it's good. Yeah. Well, guys, all right. So in concluding here, you know, I wanted to end with a couple of things. One is, so how did you ultimately, find your way through
Heather, I'll
the
start.
experience?
Yeah, I can
Yeah,
start.
please.
And I know, having said that, like, there's a part of us that really still is trying.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, Hope, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, part of us that is trying. I mean, I think coming into yourself is a lifelong journey. So I think there will be part of all of us that is continually trying to really find out who we are. I think that's true even as part of a triplet unit, but also independent of that, because we're all faced with different experiences over time that help us to question certain things and figure out, does that make sense for me or does it not? And I think those things happen at all different stages of life. Um, for me, finding my way through being a triplet, like you said, I think, we will continue to do that. But I think it took me some time to figure out who I was independent of the two of you. Um, I think we can all laugh when we say that a lot of my path and my journey and moving through my maze to find the path that was like kind of like my way out. It came with a lot of rebellion, as I said yesterday, trying, striving, struggling to find my identity by chopping my hair off from it being very long to very short, dyeing my hair red at a certain point. Um, and I think when the opportunity presented itself, I moved away. I lived outside of the country for, a little over a year, um, struggling to find out who I was again, independent of, us growing up together, Heidi, independent of you and I going to college together. And then when I came back from being abroad, I moved across the country to San Francisco and lived there for several years. And it wasn't like I was running away. I think I was running toward finding myself.
Mhm.
But it's funny though, finding myself independent of our trio, but also independent again of our larger family complex. So I think for me, it was trial and error, doing things and finding, do I want to be in this part of the country or a different part of the country? Do I want to live outside the country? Do I not want to live outside the country? Um, so I think, I sort of continually was trying to figure myself out along the way. And I have now, as I've gotten older, come to realize just how rare and how special our tripletness is. I have come to um, I've come from running toward kind of like finding my own identity over the course of my life. Like we're 54, so we've been at this for a long time. But as I move further in life, I find myself coming back to how completely special it is to be a triplet, and I'm super thankful. So I think for people finding their way through being part of a sibling pair, it's going to come with trial and error, and you'll find what feels right to you, and you'll move in a direction that feels right to you. But it might come with some rebellion, it might not.
Thanks, Hopi. I think that that is, those are just such great words. And I do think that, to your point, to Heidi's point, I mean, finding yourself is certainly a lifelong experience. And of course, it comes with a lot of trial and error. And I think for me, my sense of self and wanting my own identity is really what propelled me to attend a different college, than you guys, because I was really trying to find my way through and find my independence. I wanted to be somewhere for the first time in my life where I wasn't known as one of the triplets, to what we were talking about yesterday. And I really do think that my freshman college experience was so incredibly difficult, right? Because I was away from the both of you for the first time in my life. Um, and it was the first time in my life where I really had to work so hard to make friends, because I didn't have my two built in friends right by my side. Um, and as I look back on and reflect on the question, I really do believe that choosing a different college taught me a lot about myself. And again, when I said in our first podcast that, I remember being at, you know, um, the freshman college experience where you had to introduce yourself, and it was the first time in my life that I introduced myself as Heather, and not one of the triplets. So I think that taught me a lot about myself and my ability really to adapt to a new environment, without my triplet sisters to fall back on, because you guys have always been, the folks that I knew, had my back. Um, so I think it helped me find my independence in a new and different way. But again, it goes to finding yourself as a lifelong journey, whether or not you're part of a triplet or a twin or a multiple set. And the interesting thing for me too is to your point, Hope, about coming back to where we are now and at this point in our lives, and we've found ourselves coming back to each other, and connecting to each other again through this podcast. So the special and the rare nature of how we grew up is, um, it's just so important to me. Um, and what about you, Hyde?
As I sit and listen to you guys, it just sort of this phrase kind of came up, and it was, you know, we've been trying to find our way through in order to find our way home.
Oh, that's going
Oh,
to
I
make
love
me
that.
cry.
That's the place I know, right? To the place that we started. But, to your points, you guys, I think you
No, you're both going to make me cry.
We're all going to cry and then start laughing.
well, people don't understand like the joy of the experience, but also the pain. And I think, you know, that's been, I think, for me, the motivating factor for sort of the things that I've chosen to do in my adulthood, like the separation. And I remember, really starting to fight to spend time with our friends, but it was like, okay, I'm going to hang out with Allie on Thursday. You guys can hang out with us some other day, but you're not hanging out with us on
Yeah.
Thursday. I also think that we gravitated toward, boyfriends as well, um, as one way to kind of create the separation, um, and wanting to be loved for who we were. And, um, same thing like in college. I mean, Heather went to Boston College. Hope and I ended up going to UMass Amherst. But initially, I thought I was going to go to UMass alone because Hope got accepted at UVM, University of Vermont, and I got waitlisted. And I was like, well, forget that. I'm going to go to UMass, and that's my decision. But then Hope ended up deciding to go to UMass, which, I was kind of mad at for quite a while. I'm not sure I was honest about it at the time. And I got the decision, probably it was more financial than anything.
Mhm.
But, and, honestly, going to college, Hope with you was one of the greatest blessings, I feel like, in my life. I'm going to cry again,
Me
but
too.
it was a great experience. It turned out to be great. But I think after I graduated from college, I went to the Peace Corps, so can't get any further really. I mean, I didn't go to China, but I was pretty far away.
I was pretty close.
You were in Japan. So all those are kind of examples, I think, of how we were really fighting hard to figure out who we were. And then even, when I got back from South America, I mean, I married Todd, my husband, a year or so after I got back, and then lived in North Carolina and then New Jersey and been in Florida for almost 20 years. I mean, so I haven't lived close to you guys geographically in a long time.
Yeah, we've been
And
away.
I think sort of that space almost protects what I feel like I've been trying to fight for my whole life.
Mm.
Um, and then I think too, just another way I found my way through is just my faith in God and,
Yeah.
choosing to really embrace Jesus and understand who he says I am, which has really been part of my healing process, I think, for me along the way. So, yeah, I think all of those things have been helpful. But I also come back to what I said at first, finding our way through to find our way home. Um, it's kind of hard pill to swallow, really, because I don't think that I've really put too much effort or energy into protecting the uniqueness and the gift that our
You're making me cry again.
experience has been, though. I mean, just that fight inside to know who I am and to feel confident in it. Um, but it's come at a cost, I think, too, if I'm just really trying to be honest in my reflection.
To our relationships, you
So
mean?
anyway, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, that's one thing I'm excited about in regard to the podcast is just, that I think it gives us the opportunity to reconnect in a way that I'm really not sure the three of us have really wanted to fight for over the past, like, 3 decades. So I don't know if, that resonates with you guys, but for me, it does anyway. Does anyone want to say anything before we end the podcast? Because I know
Um,
it's late.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to summarize sort of what each of us just said for anybody who's part of a sibling pair, I think your path to finding your way through will look different.
Yeah,
Everybody's paths do, and there's no right way. There's just your way, and embrace what your way brings you. And Heidi, I do, what you said, I mean, it does resonate, right? I mean, if I think about our relationship over time, there's no question that without any doubt in my mind, there's an innate love that I think we were born with because the three of us came into the world together.
yeah,
And there's been a beautiful security in that love through time, knowing that, you guys, no matter what, would be there to support, love, encourage, all of those great things for me. And I know that the two of you feel exactly the same way. But your point about not fighting hard to preserve that relationship, I think it does resonate. I think we've all moved in our own separate directions and haven't prioritized each other. And so, even though there's so much inherent love between us, preserving that relationship isn't something that's been prioritized. So yeah, I mean, I'm really excited and encouraged to come back to each other and find our way home.
Yeah, it goes back to, I could quote Robert Frost here, but, instead of two paths diverge in the woods, it's three paths diverge in the woods. And then at some point they come back together.
I love that.
Yeah, me too. Well, guys, comments have been great. And, of course, we hope to our listeners that this has been helpful. For those attempting to find their way through being part of a sibling set or for those raising them, we know that there are several resources online. Heath, do you want to mention a couple?
Yeah, I mean, just to Heidi's point, for more information on multiples, as she said, there's a ton of resources online. For example, you can go to multiplesofamerica.org. You can go to twinstrust.org. There's a site called Mothers of Multiples Society, etc. So there's a lot of very valid, good resources available online to learn more.
And I think there are probably like a ton of books and stuff, right?
I don't know if there are a ton of books. I honestly can't answer that because I haven't looked, but I'm imagining there's definitely some for sure. Yeah. And there's also discussions, forums, there's Facebook group. I know of one Facebook group for multiples. I don't know if there are several, but yeah, it's exciting for those listening who are interested in some of the resources that we're citing, to check them out and see if they're at all helpful to you. So anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today on our podcast. And Heath, do you want to sign off with our typical statement about ending the podcast?
I will. And so I would just say that to all of our Find Your Way Throughers, thank you for being with us on this journey. And, we hope that you find your way through to our next podcast. And until then, we just want to let you know that, you've got this.
You got this.
You've got this.